So 2025 is the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and every year we mark that on Holocaust Memorial Day. And this year, the theme of Holocaust Memorial Day is life after liberation. So this project that we're going to be working on is called We Will Tell Your Stories, and it's where we're going to be working together to tell the story of Holocaust survivors. And Holocaust survivors need their stories telling because unfortunately some of them are no longer with us, and together we're going to do that. So when I write a story, I need an idea to start with, and what I do is I find out about, in this case, real Holocaust survivors' stories. So I read things in books, I remember things I've read in books, I go onto websites that relate to the Holocaust, and I find out people's stories, and the idea comes from there, and I choose the idea that appeals most to me. And what I've done in here is I've gone into the lives of 5 different Holocaust survivors, and I've made some notes and I've put some documents in my scrapbook so that you can browse through them and choose which Holocaust survivor you want to write a story about. And for me, like, you're using some of my raw materials, and those raw materials are the idea that we can turn, hopefully, into a story. So I decided that I was going to choose to write about Maya Hirsch, who's one of the 5 people in my scrapbook, and I knew about his story, but I needed to do more research. So I found out about his mother and his father and his siblings and what happened to them. I found out where he was. He was in Auschwitz, for instance, and I found out that he came to England. He was a refugee. He became a British citizen. He came to live in the Lake District, and he ended up as a tailor in Manchester, and he went on to do lots of excellent things in his life. And having done that extra research on top of my original idea, I really feel like I've got a grip on him. As part of my research into Maya Hirsch, I wanted to go to the country he was from, so Poland. So I went to Krakow in Poland. In particular, I wanted to go to the Jewish quarter. The Jewish quarter in Krakow is a fascinating place, and being there and being in the place where a lot of Jewish people lived before the Nazis arrived really gave me a sense of where Maya Hirsch came from. And I think that was really important to me in writing the story. As part of writing Maya's story, I needed to go to Auschwitz concentration camp where he was kept as a prisoner. So I saw the bags and the glasses and the other things of the victims that were murdered there throughout the museum, and seeing those things really gave me a sense of who these people were who passed through Auschwitz. You come into the concentration camp and you see one of the cattle trucks. It's really striking because that's where people were offloaded and they were separated. And some went to be slaves, and many went to be immediately murdered by the Nazis. Seeing that was really striking. Then looking over from there towards the barracks where the people like Maya Hirsch were kept. It's really important to go to those places because I find out things I need to put in the story, but it also helps me with the tone. Understanding what's gone on and what he's been through helps me get the tone right, so I can tell his story in the most appropriate way. And I hope that me showing you this in a film can help you do the same sort of thing as writers. I struggle to plan things in my head. I have to do it on bits of paper. And so what I do to sort of break open the story for me is to ask myself 6 basic questions, which are: who is the story about? That's my character. where and when did the events happen? That's your setting. What happened to them and how did things play out for them? And that's your plot. And then why did the things happen, which is like the motivation of the people involved in the story. And I go through and I ask myself all these 6 questions. And once I've done that, I've got kind of raw materials for writing, for a plan to write a story. And what I often do is I actually tear these 6 different answers apart and try and put them in a different order to juxtapose them to see what works. Do you start with a character? Do you start with a setting? Do you start with other things? And usually the story comes to me then when I've got the bits of paper in front of me, and then I've kind of got a rough plan which I can then move towards writing my story. I write knowing that I'm going to make loads of mistakes, that I'm going to be clumsy. But for me, I like to just write it down really quickly because I know I'm going to be going back to edit it, to refine it, to improve it. I'm going to spend as much time rewriting it as I have been writing it in the first place. And that's how I quickly turn a plan into a story. I check for characters, does it make sense? I check that I've used the best language, and edit by edit, I make it as good as I can possibly make it. But because we're writing about something really important, like the Holocaust, like really serious history about real people's lives and deaths, I have to make sure I get it right. So what I do is I find someone who can verify what I've done, can just double check that I haven't made any silly mistakes or can improve it. Just give me advice about how I can improve it. And so with this story, with Maya's story, I went to a friend of mine who knew Maya very well, and he works at the Lake District Holocaust Project, and his name is Trevor Avery.
It's a powerful story that I know very well because I knew about the children here and I knew Maya personally. It gets across how it was for him to be in Windermere, the Lake District. If I have a comment, I would say check the details. Check the details, the numbers of how many were, say, killed in Auschwitz. Be quite specific on that one because there's a lot of leeway and we have to be really specific. And with Maya himself, check how many camps he's been in. They're all in very different camps. And there was one detail which is interesting. When I've talked to Holocaust survivors over the years, what they talk about more than anything is food, starvation and food. And there's a lovely comment that's in this about what they were given to eat. But soup maybe sounds a little bit grand. What we all think of as soup is something that your mum or your dad makes or you get out of a tin, you know, we always use soup. But soup to them could often be just boiling water with a few potato peelings in. We wouldn't call it soup. So just check those details. But apart from that, the thought behind it was great, that you capture that. Just those small details that I would double check on and get them right. And then you'll capture the whole story well. I'd visited Auschwitz. It's one of my many trips there. And I was standing at the departure gate waiting to get on the aeroplane at Krakow to come back to Manchester. And I got a phone call. And it was a mutual friend of Maya's and myself, and she told me the sad news that Maya had just passed away. Well, only a few hours earlier, I'd been standing in the very place where he'd stayed at Auschwitz. And it was so, so powerful. And I remember my last meeting with him. He was very frail, very old man. And he said to me, "Trevor, I'm afraid that people are going to forget me. If they forget me, they forget my story and they forget my family. They have no one else to speak on their behalf." And he said to me, "Promise me you'll keep telling my story." And I promised him. So when I found that this was happening about Maya, it really, really did touch me. I get very emotional about it. He was a wonderful, wonderful human being, very gentle, very dignified. And I knew him very, very well. And I know right now he's looking down on us, and I'm keeping my promise.
Maya Hirsch. The man speaks slowly and clearly into the microphone. He is telling his story, giving his testimony. His name is Maya Hirsch. Each one of us got a little room, he says, with a little cabinet to put some belongings into. Of course, we had nothing to put in the cabinet, because all we had was only what we were stood up in, but we felt really great. Maya Hirsch died 8 years ago, but we still have his words. We had a wonderful clean bed here, white linen, one to each person, he says. Then he adds, we felt we were human beings. You have read about Maya Hirsch. He is an Auschwitz survivor. He came to England as a refugee in August 1945 after the Second World War. You try to imagine that moment when he stood in that little room with his clean bed, with his white linen, and you remember what you have learned about Auschwitz, how people were stacked on wooden bunks like there were shelves, how, when they arrived at Auschwitz, he would have had his clothes stripped, his hair shaved, and any belongings he had held on to taken. That is why he would have had nothing to put in his little cabinet when he came to England. Maya Hirsch was given a meal after he had been shown to his room. The first thing that always arrives, he explains, is buttered bread. Hardly the plate has touched the table, then we grabbed the bread as quickly as possible, those who were quick enough, and packed our pockets with it for later. You try to imagine the frenzy of 300 children doing this, scrambling, fighting for bread. How they felt, but you cannot really. Maya goes on to explain. The people in charge took us into the kitchen and showed us how many stacks of loaves they've got, and there is more arriving tomorrow. There is no need for that. In Auschwitz, you were told by one of the historians that each prisoner was given a bowl of grain coffee, a bowl of watery soup with maybe some vegetables, but no meat, and bread kept from the prisoners for so long it became mouldy. This to make them ill. Sometimes they would also receive a small piece of cheese. Then they had to work all day. You have read that these meals were called starvation rations, enough for the prisoners to work as slaves for a time until they died of starvation. This is why Maya Hirsch and the other children packed their pockets with bread when they were given it on their arrival to England. And this is something I look back on with great joy, actually, Maya Hirsch explains, as a result of great suffering, but nonetheless great joy. Once you've listened to Maya's words, you find an obituary of him online. You learn more about his life before the Nazis occupied Poland, about his father and his mother and his siblings, Yakov, 17, Herschel, 11, Chaim, 8, Tovi, 7, all murdered apart from Yakov. Of 100 family members, only Yakov and Maya survived. The rest were killed because they were Jews. After the occupation of Poland, Maya was forced to work as a slave, endured 9 different concentration camps, including Auschwitz, a place where 1 million Jews were murdered. Maya Hirsch was 18 when he came to England as a refugee. With the help of the British Jewish community, he received an education and set up a business as a tailor. Later in life, he visited schools to tell their story about Auschwitz, about the Holocaust, about his life in Poland before the Nazis came, about coming to England as a refugee. We felt like human beings, Maya Hirsch says, remembering the bed, the room, the bread. And now you are at Auschwitz. You are standing close to the block where Maya was kept. You have his words in your head. And you remember Trevor, a friend of Maya's, who went to see him before he died, aged 90. Trevor said that Maya had been worried that people would forget him, his story, his family. And he asked Trevor, "Promise me you'll keep telling my story." Trevor promised. And today you're reading or listening to Maya Hirsch's story. We will tell their stories.
And so we came to Carlisle Airport, and from there, either by coach or by army lorries, we were taken to Windermere. I came in an army lorry, I remember. And the first thing, we were taken to our barracks, which were occupied, of course, previously by civilian engineers building the flying boats. And each one of us got a little room, a little cubicle, with a little cabinet to put some belongings into it. Of course, we had nothing to put into the cabinet, because all we had was only what we stood up in. But we felt really great. We had a wonderful clean bed here, white linen, one to each person. We felt we human beings. We've been treated in a most humane way with dignity, and we felt great. Each one of us got trifle, I remember. And as it is customary, when you sit down at the table in the dining room and you serve the meal, the first thing that always arrives is buttered bread. Hardly the plate was touching the table, that we grabbed the bread as quick as possible, those who were quick enough, that is, and packed our pockets with it for later. The people in charge of us took us into the kitchen and showed us how many stacks of loaves of bread they've got, and more is arriving tomorrow. There's no need for that. We soon learned. And this is something I look back with great joy, actually. As a result of suffering, but nevertheless great joy.
Thank you very much for watching the film and taking part in these writing exercises around Maya Hirsch and the other Holocaust survivors, which, as you know, the theme was We Will Tell Your Stories. And I really appreciate you doing this, and so does the National Literacy Trust, because we think that you telling the stories of Holocaust survivors is really important. And the fact that you've done it means, I believe, that it's much more likely that we'll be able to prevent and even stop future genocides. So what you've done is really important. And what I'd also like to say is keep doing stuff like this, because if we can keep doing stuff like this, we can make the world a better place.